September 1, 1939. Nazi Germany invades Poland. And the Wehrmacht, the German army, is followed by the Einsatzgruppen, mobile death squad sent to eliminate civilians, particularly members of the Polish intelligentsia such as teachers, priests, and community leaders. After the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, these paramilitary killing units, supported by the Wehrmacht and local collaborators, expand their campaign of terror eastward. They conduct mass shootings targeting Jews, Romani people, Soviet officials, and people with disabilities. From 1941 to 1945, while operating behind the front lines in Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe, the Einsatzgruppen murder around 2 million men, women, and children, accounting for roughly 1/3 of all Jewish Holocaust victims. One of the perpetrators involved in these atrocities is Hans Isenmann. Hans Wilhelm Isenmann was born in 1922 in Berlin, then part of the Weimar Republic, which was the name given to the government of Germany from 1918 to 1933. During his childhood, Germany experienced an economic collapse, hyperinflation, mass unemployment, and growing support for extremist parties that claimed they could restore national pride. On January 30, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Paul von Hindenburg. Like many young Germans shaped by propaganda and economic despair, Hans Isenmann entered the Hitler Youth, a state youth organization that prepared boys for future service in the German army or the SS through ideological and pre-military training. Members were encouraged to view war as a duty and obedience to Adolf Hitler as the highest virtue. The SS, headed by Heinrich Himmler, was transformed from a small bodyguard unit into a central instrument of terror in the Third Reich. It controlled police forces, concentration camps, and later its military wing, the Waffen SS. In this environment, Isenmann continued his radicalization, and in 1939 he volunteered for service in the SS. The Second World War started on September 1, 1939 when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. On Sunday, June 22, 1941, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, its ally in the war against Poland. For Nazi Germany, this attack was not an ordinary military operation. The war against the Soviet Union was a war of annihilation between German fascism and Soviet communism, a racial war between German Aryans and subhuman Slavs and Jews. Following the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazi regime unleashed a campaign of unprecedented brutality. As the German military advanced, Nazi forces, including the SS and its killing units, Einsatzgruppen, systematically targeted civilians, particularly Jews, communists, and other groups deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. Entire villages were wiped out in mass executions, and millions of Soviet prisoners of war were subjected to starvation, forced labor, and summary execution. Hans Isenmann was among the thousands of young men drawn into this expanding war of annihilation. In the East, after completing his SS training, he was assigned to the 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking, a mechanized formation of the Waffen SS. The division had been formed in June 1940 on the orders of Heinrich Himmler and was intended to demonstrate what the regime called the unity of racially acceptable nations. It recruited volunteers from Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, and the Scandinavian countries, and it fought on the Eastern Front, where the ideological goals of the Nazi leadership were translated into daily violence against soldiers and civilians. In the early hours of June 30, 1941, the German forces occupied the city of Lwów, located in the west of today's Ukraine. In the chaos that followed, German units and local collaborators initiated a campaign of terror against the Jewish population. The Nazis employed local thugs to round up Jews, dragging them from their apartments and subjecting them to various forms of degradation. Many were forced to clean streets on their hands and knees or perform humiliating rituals designed to associate them with communism, further reinforcing the propaganda that Jews were complicit in Bolshevik atrocities. Jewish women faced particularly horrific treatment, including being stripped naked, beaten, abused, and raped. Many of them were chased naked and beaten with wooden clubs, not only by local men but also underage boys. The Jews were assaulted also with axes and knives. Hans Isenmann and his platoon from the 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking arrived in Lwów shortly after the occupation began. In his post-war interrogation, he stated that the unit took part in 4 roundups within the first 2 days of their deployment. According to his testimony, up to 800 Jewish people were seized, including men, women, the elderly, and children. All of them were taken to an area east of the city and shot. Isenmann admitted that he personally shot approximately 120 individuals during these executions. The mass killings carried out by his platoon took place alongside the wider campaign of terror unfolding across the city. 2 days later, the platoon was ordered to Berdichev, today's Berdichev, a city located around 150 kilometers southwest of Kiev, the capital of Soviet Ukraine. There, Isenmann reported that similar operations began immediately. Up to 800 Jewish men were rounded up, taken in groups outside the city, and executed in broad daylight. He described the execution as follows: "We were positioned approximately 90 meters away from the pits. Our men were divided as follows: 6 men to guard and 6 men to shoot. People were brought to the pits in groups of 45 to 50. They had to face us. We were armed with the following weapons: 1 machine gun, 2 submachine guns and the rest, rifles. I personally shot with submachine gun." As in Lwów, Isenmann claimed that his personal participation resulted in the deaths of roughly 120 people. After the war, he described how the executioners acted with the help of local residents, saying, "Our platoon was divided into groups of 2. Each group was assigned 1 resident who pointed out Jewish apartments and houses. We entered the apartments, took everyone, including children and the elderly, and led them out into the streets. Before the victims reached the execution site, their valuables were confiscated and collected under guard, a practice Isenmann described as routine. The unit later operated in the Ukrainian city of Tarashcha, where Isenmann stated that about 400 people were shot. He claimed to have personally killed 60 of them. Executions, he explained, were regarded as common duty within the division. In the following years, the division continued its operations across Eastern and Southern Europe. Isenmann also testified that in September 1943 he took part in the hanging of approximately 25 to 30 civilians in the town of Metkovic in German-occupied Yugoslavia. The Second World War in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Hans Isenmann was captured by Soviet forces and placed under investigation for his role in the mass shootings carried out by the 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking. He was charged under the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union of April 19, 1943. A law created to punish those responsible for the murder and torture of Soviet civilians and the execution and mistreatment of captured Red Army soldiers, because of what Soviet authorities described as many instances of terrible atrocities and monstrous violence. The decree established the death penalty by hanging for those found guilty. During the Kiev Trial, which became known as the Kiev Nuremberg and took place between January 17 to 28, 1946, Isenmann and 14 German and Austrian members of the German police and gendarmerie for the Kiev region were tried and convicted of the murder and torture of civilians and prisoners of war. During the proceedings he stated that such methods were contrary to all laws of humanity, claiming That he had abandoned his faith in fascism when he was first ordered to shoot civilians. Isenmann insisted that when he joined the SS he had not been told the things he would later be required to do. The tribunal rejected his defense, and he was among the 12 out of 15 defendants who were sentenced to death by the verdict of the military tribunal of the Kiev military district. 3 men received prison sentences, 2 of them to 15 years and 1 to 20 years of hard labor. On January 29, 1946, the 23-year-old Hans Isenmann was to be executed by hanging alongside the other condemned Nazis. The execution was held publicly in Kiev's Kalinin Square and became a theater of horror. 200,000 people gathered in what is today Independence Square to witness the execution of 12 men who had participated in the deaths of more than 100,000 innocent men, women, and children. Soviet officials brought the condemned to the gallows on 6 trucks. On each of the 6 platforms stood 2 prisoners, with nooses placed around their necks as the crowd watched in silence. Shortly before the execution, an official concluded his speech with the words, "Comrade Commandant, enforce the sentence." The trucks then moved forward, leaving the condemned to hang swaying in the air. The rope around the neck of Oberstleutnant George Truckenbrod snapped, but despite an ancient tradition that such a man might be spared, the authorities replaced the rope and hanged him a second time. The crowd cheered, and disabled people, who had suffered under the Nazis, beat the corpses with their crutches. The bodies were taken down only in the evening and buried at a special site. The hanging of January 29, 1946 was the last public execution in the history of Kiev. Hans Isenmann faced a justice he had denied to so many, and his death became a stark reminder that the crimes he committed could not pass unanswered.